Okay, cool. Welcome to the group project kickoff. We are going to be doing Futbol for the next 2 weeks. Yeah, let's hop into it. I'm going to share. Great. Get this set up. Cool. Yeah, so the idea with this project is you are going to build a data interpreting machine. So you're kind of going to build a data access layer or object relational model kind of deal here. And you probably haven't heard much about those terms, but as is with most things, you're going to hear more about them next week. And you're going to kind of be getting tidbits of information throughout next week about, things that this project is going to ask you to do. But the kind of two things that I want to really point out that are part of these learning goals, it's like similar to what we've done before, but the biggest one here that is part of this learning goal is this focus on design. So design an object-oriented solution to a problem. So this is the idea that we're going to build classes that adhere to single responsibility principle. All right, and so this is now this kind of piece where you're going to take what you know about classes, objects, and kind of like design a solution that makes sense based on not only what you know now, but what you're going to be taught in the coming weeks. And so the way that this project is structured is a little bit different. So you'll be in groups of either 3 or 4. There's one group of 3. Everyone else will be a group of 4. So now there are many more moving parts than just a paired project. So Git workflow, having a Git workflow defined and collaborating on your pull request are going to be like vital parts of this project. What else? So the way that we have the project set up is on Monday of week 5, your statistics methods are due. So the methods that we ask you to create for this project will be due on that Monday morning. And from Monday until through Thursday, you will be working on the design portion of this project. Okay, and so the design portion is going to be like how many classes you have, how many objects you have, and also thinking about how you can implement either inheritance or modules, which you haven't had your classes on those yet, but they are going to be part of this design decision making. Okay, and so don't let that freak you out in any way, but just know that like that is a crucial part of this project, and it's going to be like it's hard to generally what we'd see from students before we design the project this way is a lot of like focus on getting the methods done and making the functionality piece of the project as perfect as possible, and then the part that takes the back seat is these design decisions. So we don't want that to happen here. So that's why we're kind of like saying you have two due dates for this one. It's like Monday of week 5, Thursday of week 5. One portion is the statistics methods, and the other portion is now knowing what you know based on the inheritance lesson, the modules lesson, the class methods lesson. How are you going to redesign this project in a way that refactors it to dry this up and be more OOP? Yeah. Questions coming up so far?
Hey, Tim, will it be due like that Wednesday night like we did with this project, that Wednesday before the Thursday?
I don't know. Probably is the best I can do. Like, we still have to talk about that
Okay.
as an instructor team. I kind of liked that y'all were not spending all night the night before up trying to complete things, and it just had to be due. And I think that's probably best for your self-care and for your time management purposes anyway. So I would say probably, but we just have to like make that call. Yeah, good question though. We'll get back to you no later than tomorrow.
I got a question, Tim.
Yep.
What is single responsibility principle exactly?
Yep. So it's this idea that your class does one thing and does it well. So it's kind of like this idea that if you have a ship object, it is only worried about the state of itself as a ship, and it only has methods that pertain to a ship, right? Like its single responsibility is to be a ship and to execute ship functions, and that's it. So that's kind of like the idea of how you can look at like objects having SRP.
Versus what?
Versus probably like your game class that has quite a lot of functionality going on that possibly could be encapsulated within other objects. Yeah, the idea is that like your classes are not too long and objects only know as much as they need to know. So there's not like a ton of like dependency across objects. Yeah, Enrique, go ahead.
Maybe I missed a sentence or two, but I feel like I heard you say that all the methods were due and then we were going to do design.
That's correct.
How is that? So is it just going to be one big class?
No.
Okay.
So
Yes.
So I'll let you finish. Sorry.
I'm just having a really hard time conceptualizing like how we don't worry about design as we're building all these methods and then worry about the design if afterwards. So that in my brain translates into it's all in one doc and then we're figuring out like what we're divvying up, but that's
Totally.
not what you're saying.
Totally, yeah. So the majority of these methods are going to it's going to ask you to have these methods live on the stat tracker instance, but like you'll soon find like very quickly this class starts getting very bloated, very long, super quick. So I'm not saying wait on the design until the very end of the project and don't even think about it until then. I'm saying here are a couple of days where that's the only focus, whereas the focus of the project as a whole, including getting the methods done, including like thinking about like how you're going to design this, is for that first half. But there is some dedicated design refactoring time for you all to think about like what you've done this far, where you can dry things up, where things can be more SRP, where you can create some objects that can have some very specific use cases or specific responsibilities in this project.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay. I think that's all for now. Cool. So yeah, organization, like I said, this is like a key part of this, and it's going to make a huge difference now that there are 3 to 4 people on a team. All of those like now one-to-one relationships like exponentially multiply than when you have the paired project. So like a key is going to be like communicating early and often, coming up with some kind of Git workflow that you all agree on, being very clear about your goals for the project as an individual up front, and possibly I would recommend utilizing some sort of project management tool. So something to keep all of you on the same page, some sort of interface. I think you all probably did this in Mod 0 with the GitHub projects, so you might be most familiar with that. And it's kind of this idea that you're going to create some, you know, you're basically going to create a to-do list, and then you're going to assign things to each other in that to-do list, and you are going to like move them over when they are done so everyone can be on the same page of like, hey, this is where we're at. Also highly recommend like having like a daily stand-up and a daily retro. I think like at least one meeting, whether it's at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day with everyone, where it's like, hey, this is where we're at, this is what we plan to get done, is going to be super helpful for this project. We don't require this project management tool, but like all things, like I kind of tell you, like it's coming. So I think that you can look at it two ways. You can say this is a layer of overhead we don't want because we don't want to learn something new right now. Or you can say like, there's no way that we're really going to stay organized as a group without some kind of tool to keep us in line. I would think that the latter is better, but we kind of like let that decision be made by you as a group this time around. Cool. Yeah. Okay. So testing I want to talk about. So TDD is like what we've been pushing, and it will certainly be your friend in this case. Because you have such a large data set here, you're going to need to take a couple of approaches kind of in conjunction with one another. And so the idea is that you're going to either create fixture files. So the idea there is like you take a sample of the data and you use that for your testing, so that each test doesn't have to run through loading the data, all of this like, you know, thousands of rows of data every time you run your test suite. And then another strategy is introducing mocks and stubs. So the objects that you create that depend on other objects, not actually instantiating those objects, but using mocks instead. And then stubbing out certain methods and certain attributes so that you do have the data that you need to work with to get some of these methods to run. And this is kind of like one of those things where really you're going to have to dive in, get your hands dirty, and figure out like the pain points of using the whole data set and using fixtures, because there are pain points in both. And that is like kind of by design, where you have to kind of feel that pain to be able to understand the value of implementing mocks and stubs. Yeah, that's part of the design here. The other part that I want to talk about here is the Spec Harness. So we use the Spec Harness to check the methods portion of this project. So we have written our own, similar to like the independent challenges, like we have our own spec that runs against what you have created. And it allows us to check whether or not like your methods are doing what they should be doing using the data set. So I'll show you this here. So the Spec Harness has its own setup, its own like way that you run it, which you will kind of like go through by following the README, but I'll open it here. Maybe I'll open it, yeah. Cool, so it's its own repo, and it needs to kind of like be at the same level as your Futbol repo for it to run properly. And there's gonna be some environment setup like pain points probably as you get this thing set up, and I think it's best to work through that as a group. Like there are many times where one person has it up and running, but the other person is like, another person in your group is getting errors, and so like this is environment issues, they come up all the time on the job, and you know, we're here to help you all work through that. But I would say like, remember that you can always Google an error message. Like my number one thing that I do for environment issues, like know a ton about environment stuff, like system level stuff. So what I do is I always Google the error message constantly and like look and start reading about it online. That's what I would say to do. Remember that every student that has done this project has come across similar errors, and I promise you those answers are out there on the internet to help you with those environment issues. What else do I want to say about this? The Spec Harness is 99.99% not the problem. Your code is 99.99% the problem. I never want to say like it's impossible that the Spec Harness is wrong, because that sounds kind of arrogant, and I also didn't write the Spec Harness. So what I will say is I've never seen it be wrong yet, and it's highly unlikely that it is wrong. Yeah, so if the Spec Harness is giving you one thing and your methods are giving you another, it's probably because your methods are not quite doing what the spec asks you to do, and it's totally okay to ask clarifying questions about that. But if you come to us and say the Spec Harness is broken and blah, 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 it's gonna be a lot harder for us to empathize with your situation. What else? Questions about TDD, Spec Harness. This is kind of its own section for a reason, but happy to take questions on it.
Yeah, I have a question.
Cool, what's up?
And this might come on later as we do the project, but Spec Harness, what does that mean exactly?
So Spec Harness means like like a spec is basically like a set of tests. Like it's referred to as a spec in just like a lot of software circles. It's like a common term. And so a Spec Harness is this idea that you can always run this Spec Harness and it will always tell you whether your methods are producing the correct result or not. So it's kind of like this way for you to test to see if you've like built your methods in a way that actually does the intended functionality.
So that's something that we can use like as a way to make sure we're doing it right?
Exactly, yeah, for each method. And so like the entire Spec Harness can run at the same time, or you can look up the way, so it's written in RSpec, so it's not like mini tests, it's not the framework you're used to, but there is a way to run one test at a time in RSpec via providing some command line arguments when you run the Spec Harness. And I think that you will find that that is a much better workflow rather than waiting on the entire Spec Harness to finish every single time you need to test one specific method. So I encourage you to look at that. And I would think of the Spec Harness as your friend, not your enemy. It will feel like your enemy at times because it's not giving you the desired output, but really what it is it's a tool to ensure that you've done something correctly before you move on. And I think that's how I would view it.
Hey, Tim.
Hey.
In reading the way that is written, it says prior to your evaluation. So this is kind of a double question. Would you think that it would behoove us to kind of set that Spec Harness up from the get-go so that we can work through any bumps that may come up versus waiting to like then install it prior to our evaluation?
Yes, so it says that, but I'll go ahead and say like the sooner you have the Spec Harness set up, the sooner you can know if what you're writing is right. So I would do that like as like one of the first few things I do. That's generally what we're looking for at the first project check-in, is that you at least have it by then. So know that like that's what we're going to be looking for then. I would say like one of the first things I would do is set up that Spec Harness, go through any of the environment issues that are coming up so that everyone can depend on it as a tool to like ensure that you're writing methods in the right way. One thing that's like confusing for students about the Spec Harness is it doesn't, the Spec Harness isn't looking for any of your tests. Our Spec Harness and your tests completely separate. The way that you write your tests will never affect our Spec Harness, okay? So keep that in mind. Like, your tests are separate from our spec harness. Your actual code that lives in your lib directory is what the spec harness goes and looks for and runs on. All right, so that's like a clear distinction to make. And also, yeah, the spec harness isn't a replacement for writing your own tests. We expect every method in this project that you create to have a corresponding test. Adike, I saw you had your hand up, but then you put it down. Did I answer what you were going to ask, or you still have something?
It wasn't an ask so much as was a comment that's kind of gone in the chat. Check your Ruby versions. Just make sure everyone has the same Ruby versions.
That is a great recommendation. Thanks for saying that. Cool. All right, so yeah, we've kind of like separated the requirements into specific iterations, and iteration 1 is like pure setup. Like, can you read the data in the way that we lay out, right? And so like file IO isn't something like we've really taught or going to teach. It's like a thing that like you got to do sometimes, like read data from a file or write data to a file. And it's like something that exists in Ruby. There's like a class for it, or there's multiple classes for it that you can use. There's multiple approaches you can use, but yeah, it's kind of like we're going to have a ton of CSV data. So the .csv is going to be the type of extension, type of file that you're going to be reading from. And we go through next week kind of like how that works and with some examples. But it's something like I think that you all can, I don't want to speak for you all, but I would say like this is something that you all should be able to like go and kind of like as a team, because you don't have to do it totally in the dark alone, but like as a team go and like figure out how to do. Like, it's like, here's some data, you need to use the CSV reading to read data from the file, and then the idea is that you are going to Rubify that data. So you're gonna, with each row from the CSV, generally create a Ruby object so that now you can do Ruby things on a piece of data. That probably doesn't sound that probably sounds a little intimidating, but I can just tell you, like, the reason we don't spend a ton of time on this is because it doesn't come up a ton in the workplace. It comes up sometimes, and it's just something that like people go like kind of figure out how to do. Pry is your friend here. Pry is your friend. And yeah, that's what I'll say on that. So there's a couple other setup pieces here. One person on the team is going to fork the repo. Everyone else is going to be added as a collaborator and clone the repo. Simple Cov is a tool that you haven't implemented yet, but it's basically a way for you to see like which parts of your code are tested or not. And it's kind of generous, to be honest, on like what it considers being tested. So yeah, that's like, it's an extra tool. And then the rake file is a way for you to run all of your tests without having to run an individual file. And I know some of y'all were talking about that yesterday or the day before, and it's not a big lift to set it up. It's kind of like a couple of lines in a specific type of file called a rake file, and there's a lesson plan that walks you through how to do that. Yeah, you may want to consider using Ruby's CSV class. I think that's what I would do if I were you. Yeah, what's up?
Sorry, just a little up.
Yep.
I had a lot of trouble last time with like Simple Cove basically telling me I had 0 tests one time, and it turned out that it requires a def setup. Like, because once I put like my def setup and all these ats, that was my workaround at least. I never actually asked for clarity. Then all of a sudden my coverage shot up to a number I thought was more appropriate. What's that about, or does it require that, or?
I mean, I don't remember that being a part, to be honest, of this, because like I could be wrong, but I I don't know is the best thing I can give you right now. I'm not positive if that is like the requirement of Simple Cov. Every time I've had to set up Simple Cov, this is probably bad, but I just go read the README down here, set it up, make sure it runs when I run my test suite, and like open up this window that shows you the coverage, and then I move on with my life once it's set up properly. So I'm not positive if you need a setup method or not, but um, all of those like requirements and like kind of like getting started stuff should be here on the README of Simple Cov. And in Simple Cov is like a lot of things you use open source software that is a tool for doing one thing, and that is telling you like, hey, your code is either covered by your tests or it's not.
Adike, did you do a test helper file the last time?
I did. I had it set up, but it was definitely a moment where once I figured out how to put Simple Cove, it came up as 0%.
Okay.
And then the moment I did the def setup, it shot up to 100%. So it was one of those things where like I made the assumption then that it only takes setup methods, like measures it accordingly. So just wanted to like share that and actually just ask if you knew. But if your tests don't cover and you're getting a really low percentage, that might be a workaround. I'm not necessarily sure if what I'm hearing from you, Tim, if that's the actual solution to that. But
yeah, it's either a solution or a workaround. I think those are kind of like the same thing, but I mean, you'll see, and I think like we'll be around to help if things start getting weird, but I think y'all will be able to like figure that out, to be honest. And it's like, yeah, it's probably quirky, like has like some things that need to be a certain way, like most software does, but like that's part of this process. I know that's probably not the best answer that you're looking for on this one, but truthfully, like I don't know. However, like I look at it like I know I can go figure it out is kind of like where I'm at there, and I know you all can too. Cool. All right, so yeah, this setup piece is kind of like, all right, it's slightly different than the way that you've kind of probably seen things in the past, where there's a from CSV method here that is kind of behaving a little differently from the way that you've seen. Like usually you'll see like a dot new here and then it'll be passed here, but this is just a slightly different variation of like the way that we're going to instantiate a file. But essentially you should be able to drop this into a runner file and then run that file. And at this point, the very end of the file, stat tracker, the local variable, should hold an instance of stat tracker here after this method has executed. All right, so slightly different. From CSV is a class method, so that's why it looks a little different here. It's called directly on a class. Oh no, can y'all hear me okay? Okay, cool. Sorry, whenever it gets slow, I get worried. Okay, so you can see like this is the stat tracker class, this is the method syntax, and then it goes right into a method that takes one argument here, which is all of the file paths in a hash here. So like slightly different than what we've shown you so far, still a valid pattern. The idea will be that you have to define a class method called from CSV that then in turn does some work, and the return value of that method will be an instance of the stat tracker class. So stat tracker at the class level will have a method from CSV, and then within that from CSV method, the work will be done to create an instance. We all have a lot of experience creating instances in our tests mostly. This will be slightly different, but this will return an instance. And once you have that set up properly, where you can access the data from within these file paths, then you will be kind of like ready to move on. And this is like definitely a setup piece. There's definitely some moving parts here that you haven't seen. And so you should expect to feel slightly uncomfortable here. Like that's part of it. Yeah, let's take a break, and then I'm probably gonna like run through this real quick so you get like a quick little demo. Let's come back at 37, and yeah, see you then.
Thank you, 37.
Thank you, 37.
All right, I'm gonna run through a piece of this setup with you, and yeah, and so we'll kind of show you what this process looks like, because this is going to be like one of the processes that is like probably going to feel a little uncomfortable, because there isn't necessarily TDD in this process because it's a runner file. So we're going to kind of have to like read our errors, let our errors guide us, similar to TDD, but not the way that you're completely comfortable with. All right, so things that I have done. So I went to the Turing School examples. Nope, not there. I went to the Turing School examples and I hit the fork button. Great, that forked it over to my repo, or made a copy of it for me. And now it is my repo. Other thing that I did while y'all were on the break was I cloned it down locally so that I have my local copy. Sorry, this still says master. I will, why don't you let me, before anyone does any forking, let me make that update, and I will, I'll ping y'all when it's done so that you don't have to worry about it.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, of course. Cool, so I have this. Here's my project from the root. I'm looking over here in my data folder. This is new. I'm looking at my data. I've got some CSV rows. These are large files. I can see like, okay, it starts row 1, goes down to like almost row 15,000. This is kind of like the data that I'm going to be reading in. And so if I go back to the spec here, I can see that it says, okay, if I have a runner file and I put all this code in it, then it should work. What I really want to happen is stat tracker holds an instance of itself, or the stat tracker local variable holds an instance of the stat tracker class at this point. All right, and so what I would do is go back here to my directory, and I'm going to create a runner file. Great, I've got that, and now I'll paste in, where's all my code? I'll paste in this code, right? And so now, at this point, I need to run it and see like what the output is and probably follow my errors from this point. So if I start here, okay, I've seen this one before, a load error, cannot load such file lib stat tracker. Cool, I think I know what I need to do there is create a stat tracker file. Okay, let's run it again. Cool, uninitialized constant stat tracker. All right, so now I've made it, looks like all the way down to line 14 at this point, where I was on line 2 before, based on this error message. So that makes me feel a little bit better. I'm getting there. Uninitialized constant, name error. All right, so this doesn't exist, right? So what do I want to do? Probably go create that class, see if I can get a new error. Where is it? Cool. Let's create a stat tracker. Okay, let's run it, see if I get something different. Cool. undefined method from CSV for the stat tracker class. So that's a little bit different too than what we've seen before, as far as like how this undefined no method error looks. So I'm going to help you all out here and show you kind of like the way that this should look if I'm defining a class method, and it's self dot whatever the method that I want, or actually it's def and then self dot whatever I want my method to be. So in this case, it's from CSV. Cool. Got past that error. So as you can see, like my process is not that different from TDD, right? I'm doing one thing at a time, one step, trying to get from having an error to not having an error, right? And that's I'm reading the error messages and letting them tell me what to do next. Okay, given one expected 0 here. Okay, let's put the runner file next to me so I know what to expect. Okay, great. So that's because from CSV needs an argument. Similar to instance methods, class methods can take arguments as well. This looks like it's going to be locations. I'll call it the same thing.
Tim,
Cool.
would it be locations, or because we're actually reading it from that data file, would we want to make that the location, or is that irrelevant?
I'm going to say you can call this argument what you want. I don't think it's like the most important thing. Like it's called locations here and passed as as an argument here. So I can define my parameter here as whatever I want. I could call it data, right? It's not like a totally big deal either way. And then what else do I need to do here is basically I need stat tracker to hold an instance of itself at this point, right? Because I want to call into this method, pass in my data, and then I want to return a stat tracker object instance of itself that holds all of this data in a way that like is readable. All right, so one way I can kind of do that, I know that I know how to create an instance of a class, and I can do that here. This is kind of like inception-y. But if I call this without any arguments, I know that initialize can run under the hood. And so let's see if I can get this to run the way that I expect. Cool. Okay, I've got a stat tracker object at this point because I'm calling it right here from within this class method. This is a valid pattern. You can do this. That's why we set it up this way. Now, what I would need to do realistically is define an initialize method, probably pass in the data that comes into the from CSV and do something with it, right? So if I put a pry here, cool. Now I'm into my initialize. I see the data, okay, it's this key value pairs, this hash that points to the locations of the data. And at this point, now I need to read this data in a way that makes sense, right? Like I can either do this reading of the data in here and from CSV, I could do it here. Read data, or I could do it here. That's kind of like my design decision, read data here. And at this point, I will kind of stop showing you what to do and let you kind of go about doing this on your own. But here are some things. This method is called from CSV. So it is likely you will need some sort of CSV reading class that exists in Ruby and is part of that initial setup README to read into this data. And it is likely that you will also need to create some kind of other objects to hold the data that you are reading in, okay? So I want to just make those 2 points clear and show you that like
your mic was cutting out a little bit. I didn't get that last part.
Totally. Sorry about that. So it is likely that you will need to use the CSV class to read this data in a way that makes sense, and it'll also be likely that you have to create some other classes that will run or that will create objects of themselves in order to read in this data line by line and give yourself a way to then not just read the data, but then use the data in a way that like makes sense with Ruby objects, right? And so here's what I'll say is the objects should probably represent the data in a way that like you would think that it does. So we have a lot of teams here, so I'm thinking that I'll probably create a team class with a lot of team objects, and that's all I will say.
It's really awesome to watch your stat tracker test. Just kind of treat the I've always thought of the def initialize as like the holy grail of a class, and to see it as like number 2 just made me realize it's just a method.
It's just a method.
It's
Totally.
just a method.
Just a method that you can rely on running as the first method that runs whenever you call this .new. Just a method, just runs like well, special method, but behaves like most other methods. All right, that's all I've got. There might be, I feel like there was something I wanted to say. It's gonna come to me.
Hey, Tim,
Yep, good.
where are you going to announce who our group mates are?
Right, once there are no more questions.
Tim, so right now, the difference between the from CSV method and the initialize method isn't really clear. Like, it's a method that we're passing data into, like they're both the same.
Yeah, I've kind of done that like on purpose because I don't want to show you like how to design this. But the idea is like the only real difference is initialize is an instance method, whereas from CSV is defined as a class method. And so the way that we access those things is slightly different. Like this method from CSV exists on the class level, which is like kind of like a level higher in the hierarchy than the instance level, which is kind of like the level of, okay, now I have a stat tracker object, whereas stat tracker from CSV you can think of as like, I want to be able to access, how do I say this? The class level is kind of like all of the stat trackers that exist, and then the instance level is a specific stat tracker that exists. All right, and we are going to go into this quite a bit more in the class methods lesson, and so I can promise you that there's a lot more to come. This should all feel new. It should all feel uncomfortable. This is all, that is by design. Like what I'll say is follow the setup instructions, get it to work in a way that like follows what we ask you to do, and know that the understanding part is kind of like coming in bits and pieces along the next few weeks. What else? Kat or Mike, do y'all have anything you wanted to add about this project?
Not really. You're very thorough. You did a great job.
Oh, you're very sweet. Thank you. I'm trying to make this feel as like unintimidating as possible, while also knowing that you're probably like, what the hell?
Tim, I have a quick question.
Cool.
Last time you kind of announced as far as how this works with promotion, this project and Battleship. I'm not sure if you're admitting it specifically this time, but could you maybe clarify kind of if you didn't pass Battleship, what's required for this one, and kind of if you did pass, I don't know if that's a little confusing for some of the new people.
No, that's totally valid. Thanks for bringing that up. Where is my rubric? Yeah, so like every other project, this has a rubric. The part that is back, that was not in this morning's rubric, is conventions and mechanics. So something to think about, like you all have been writing code now for about 3 weeks, and now we're kind of going to ask you to organize that code in a way that is more readable, more succinct, and yeah, follows conventions and mechanics that we've been teaching you and giving you feedback on. So that's the part of the rubric that's new. As far as Battleship versus this project and how you can like look at those, remember that part of your promotion requirements is you have to pass either the paired project or the group project. So if you didn't pass Battleship, you need to pass this project to promote. If you did pass Battleship, you do not need to pass this project in order to promote. Now, having said that, if for any reason you give less effort than you should be giving based on the fact that, oh, I already passed the paired project, A, we will know, because it will come back to us, it always does, and B, like you are only cheating yourself, and we certainly don't even want students around who are going to only think about this program in terms of promoting from one mod to the next, instead of thinking about this as being the best developer you can be every day and focusing on your own personal growth and your growth within team dynamics.
Also, just don't screw over your cohort mates.
Totally a valid way to say it.
That would probably make you less not shitty. Is that how I'd say that?
lot of negative logic in there. I think that's it. So, other questions? Okay, time for groups then. And I have a lot of Zoom windows blocking my ability to navigate. Okay, got that. Kat, can you just check me on this before I drop them? So in our group list, it starts with Ryan and it ends with Sean.
Wait, what am I checking?
If you look at the DM between you,
Yes.
Mike, and I.
Well, both of them do.
Well, that's not fun. So the message from Mike was at 12:37 p.m.
Correct.
Okay, just wanted to check. I have seen the wrong groups dropped before, and I don't want to put y'all through that.
Let's talk in more riddles.
I don't know how else to say it. I don't know. That's the first way that came to mind, but I guess that was kind of riddly. All right, groups are dropping now. And, oh, this is the other part that I wanted to say. But I'll give you 30 seconds to find your name so you can listen to me. Cool. And I'm going to edit this message so you can have a little title here. Fun fact in Slack. So if you are in a channel or a DM and you want to edit the last message that you wrote in that, you just press, like, if your cursor is in the message box and you press the up arrow, you just like start editing that last message. It's a fun one that I use quite a bit to edit when I screw up the first time. Okay, this is what I wanted to say. So we didn't give y'all a break between these projects, just kind of the way that it like is laid out tomorrow, like with timing tomorrow, where there wasn't really another place to put this kickoff, so we just kind of had to do it today. That being said, a lot of times there's a break, like tonight would be a break between your paired and group projects. What I'll say is, remember to have the DTR first. I would go ahead and probably DTR today. And if as part of your DTR, you want to say, hey, for me, I need a break. I need to have tonight off and I need to do some self-care. I think that that is a valid thing to do. What I don't think is a valid thing to do is not say that to your group and then not be responsive. Okay. So I think like if you need self-care, great. If you want to go, if you say to your group, actually, you know, like I want to prepare for the mid-mod tomorrow. I've never seen that before. It's brand new. It's stressing me out. You've had 2 projects now. You kind of know how projects go and you have 2 weeks for this stuff. Whereas the mid-mod is coming at you tomorrow morning pretty quick. So keep these things in mind. Make the right decision for you and communicate that to your group mates is all I'll say. Yeah, that is it. Oh, give me 15 minutes and I'll update. Don't fork yet. If you already did, then you'll have to go do the update yourself. But give me 15 minutes and I'll make that master domain update on this repo.
Really appreciate you doing that, Tim. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, that is all. See y'all tomorrow for mid-mods. We'll get that scheduled to you this afternoon at some point. We'll let you know that it's up so you can know what to expect tomorrow. All right. See you later on.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, y'all.